It's such a joy to be gathered today on this Mother's Day with my Freedom Church community. And I have to say, I'm really a fan of Mother's Day. I think I've always been. It's a holiday to appreciate mothers and those who care for others and for the world. A holiday established by women with a rich history of activism, of resistance, moms who called for an end to war and violence and devastation in our communities and in our world. More than 150 years ago, in the bloody wake of the Civil War, the abolitionist Julia Ward Howe, the composer of the Battle Hymn of the Republic, issued a Mother's Day proclamation. The world, she wrote, could no longer bear such terrible violence and death. She called on women across the country to rise up through the ashes and devastation and come together in the cause of peace. 40 years later, her daughter, Anna Jarvis, created Mother's Day. It started in their home state of West Virginia, a place that has long known struggle and organizing and the striving for freedom and liberty and life. When Mother's Day was first established, it wasn't a commercial holiday where you simply buy cards or gifts for the women or mothers in your life. It was a call to come together and rise up. It was a call to end war and violence, to abolish all forms of racism and bigotry and exploitation. We can hear it in the opening words of Howe's 150-year-old proclamation. She says, "Arise then, women of this day. Arise, all women who have hearts, whether our baptism be that of water or of tears." Julia Ward Howe was clear that things were not okay. There were too many overcome by violence and war and hate and death. That's where the tears come in. But the people, and in her case, especially the mothers and others who could see far and feel deep, were to rise up. So in the midst of poverty, amid plenty, abandonment, amid abundance, amid Medicaid cuts and SNAP cuts and potential elimination of the Department of Education and Title I schools and Head Start programs and FAFSA and housing first policies, amid the immigration, detention, and deportations, amid the mobilizations and creative actions and projects of survival and mutual aid and deportation defense and protests and housing takeovers and encampments for Palestine and for the homeless and for all those who would be free. We're supposed to rise up. I think we are rising up. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm a crier. I bring a lot of tears to this struggle. And today on Mother's Day, I'm thinking about all those mothers who have had to bury their children because of poverty and the lack of Medicaid, who are crying and rising up. All those mothers who have been ripped from their homes, been separated from their children because of immigration status or gender affirming healthcare or poverty, who are crying, but rising up. In fact, every time I hear this quote or think on the history of Mother's Day, I can hear Sharon and Sierra and Pauline and Jamel and other cultural workers and song leaders in our movement singing that song, "Rise up, come on and rise up. Rise up, come on and rise up. We ain't gonna let nobody turn us around because the people united will stand our ground." I think this is an awesome Mother's Day song. And it's a song about resurrection as well. And it could also be all of them singing that Hey Na Na song for that matter. What a beautiful one. These songs and this quote from Julia Ward Howe makes me think about this Bible passage from Acts, the raising of Tabitha, called Dorcas. As we heard just a minute before from our sister Anna, comes this story from Acts 9. At Joppa, there was a certain disciple named Tabitha, which is translated Dorcas. This woman was full of good works and charitable deeds, which she did, but it happened in those days that she became sick and died. When they had washed her, they laid her in an upper room, and since Lydda was near Joppa and the disciples had heard Peter was there, they sent 2 men to him, imploring him not to delay in coming to them. Then Peter arose and went with them. When he had come, they brought him to the upper room, and all the widows stood by him weeping, showing the tunics, the garments which Dorcas had made while she was with them. But Peter put them all out, knelt down, and prayed. Turning to the body, he said, "Tabitha, arise." And she opened her eyes, and when she saw Peter, she sat up. Then He gave her his hand and lifted her up. And when he called the saints and the widows, he presented her alive. And it became known throughout all Joppa, and many believed on the Lord. I just love this story. So appropriate after Easter, especially an Easter that feels more like a continuation of Good Friday, because there's so much death and destruction all around. It feels like the ones who are falling down, the ones who are suffering the most, are the ones who have almost always been among and cared for the poor and marginalized. I see these long food lines in my neighborhood, and especially all the women like Tabitha, who have made beautiful things for our community, who are handing out free food and other necessities. But there's so much more need. And some of the very people who have been leading these ministries, helping out the community, have gotten sick or tired or even fallen asleep or died themselves. And then you have in this story, Tabitha being raised up, resurrected. And I think it's a good reminder that Jesus wasn't the only one to die, wasn't the only one to be crucified, and he's not the only one to be raised up, to be resurrected. And I think that is an awesome Eastertide message. So let's look at this story in the context of Luke and Acts just a bit more. Peter's traveling around the land. He's healing and connecting. He's walking and talking. He's educating and organizing. He called out to Aeneas to pick up his mat and walk. But it's just Tabitha. It's just Dorcas that is dead and is brought back to life by Peter. And she's a woman. And I think that's significant. She's a woman who is beloved in our community, maybe a mother who's been making a way out of no way for so many, who's provided so many in need with beautiful and necessary things. And when she dies, they clean her and they place her in an upper room and they mourn her. I want us to pause and think a bit about Tabitha, to hear about the raising of Tabitha, not the raising of just Lazarus or Jesus, not even the fallen fighters who were raised up as Jesus is crucified, but Tabitha, called Dorcas, a woman who has cared for so many. Because in this story, she's the one who's raised up. We often hear Christianity being used these days, especially to denigrate women. But it's not because it's what the Bible says. No, the Bible tells us that the one who is lifted up to continue the work in this story is Tabitha, is a woman, and not only her. There are other mothers of the movement who are lifted up in the Bible. Mothers like Rachel, who refused to stop her protests in the face of evil leaders and refused to be comforted, but is baptized through tears. There's Esther, who saves her people with the help of a crew of gender non-conforming leaders. There's a persistent widow in Luke who advocates and pushes and wins justice for her and her children and her community. There's Mary of Magdala, to whom Jesus first appears when he's resurrected himself. And Mary, the mother of Jesus, who sings a song of praise, a song of transformation and revolutionary motherhood, as our sister Savina reminds us, where the rulers will be brought down from their thrones and the poor will be lifted up. Don't all these biblical mothers sound a lot like the founders of Mother's Day? Baptized by tears and by water. So when we return to Acts 9 and Tabitha, her work and ministry, making clothes, doing good works, caring for the people, especially poor and dispossessed people, is what distinguishes her. That's what's important. She's like Jesus. She's a freedom fighter. She sees that the least of these, who are most of us, is where there's good news, is where there's resurrection and life and rising up. And I think this kind of resurrection is one that many of us can relate to, that many of us can hope for, one that's rooted in community and care and mutual solidarity. Now, commentaries often try to qualify Tabitha's resurrection. Some say that Tabitha wasn't resurrected. She was just resuscitated to her old life. Others say, isn't it strange that she's the one that's brought back to life? Shouldn't it have been Stephen or James, who also died, who should have been brought back to life? Weren't they more important to the Christian mission? But it's Tabitha, the one who practiced mutual solidarity, who cared for her community, who did the work of bringing good news to those who have been made poor by systems and structures. She's the one who rises up when Peter kneels before her. And this reminds me of a couple of the stories that I got to hear this week on this Kairos organizing tour. First, we were in Upper Darby with Desi and so others at Murphy's Free Market, a mutual aid program started by women who knew what it was to be a hungry child, who started handing out pallets of food in the pandemic and have continued to distribute food and other necessities in just the most beautiful and respectful way, a place that's bringing new life, resurrection to the community. And then we were in Harrisburg on Wednesday. We visited a Lutheran church, a church that in the early 1900s had 30,000 people coming to church on any given Sunday, but whose numbers had dwindled to 7 a few decades back. But then the church started a dental clinic and a health ministry. And since 2018, they have seen more than 100,000 patients, people in desperate need of dental care and health care. The pastor of the church, Reverend Matt, talked about the dental clinic, the nursing stations, all the ministries that the church that have the church bustling, not just on Sundays, but most days of the week. He talked about them as resurrection. Resurrection wasn't having 3,000 people in a church service any given Sunday. It was having hundreds and thousands of people in need, immigrants from countries all over the world, impoverished and transient who are poor and dispossessed, come through the church to find new life, to find new hope, to be filled with good things. This to me sounds like the work of Dorcas, of Tabitha. And after being shown the amazing work of this church, we held an organizing meeting where I got to tell the crowd gathered about some of the revolutionary women and mothers of the welfare rights movement, whose stories are not always told, just like Tabitha's, just like Murphy's Free Market, just like this Lutheran church in Harrisburg. Women that have been dissed and dismissed, like the commentators tried to diss and dismiss Tabitha from Acts 9. Now, many of us gathered on Freedom Church already know about the National Welfare Rights Organization, this national organization of poor moms on welfare, Black, Latino, white alike, who championed a welfare system, an anti-poverty system that wouldn't separate the deserving from the undeserving, but instead put an agency and power in the hands of all poor people rather than bureaucrats and social workers. As that welfare rights movement grew, their organizing coalesced around various demands, like a demand for a guaranteed and adequate income. And in the late 1960s, they would prove a force to be reckoned with, recruiting leaders like Dr. King to their cause. They were decades and decades ahead of their time. Their moral clarity on the position of poor women in this society was prophetically advanced. And in 1972, Johnny Tillman, the first chairwoman of the National Welfare Rights Organization, published an essay entitled, "Welfare is a Mother's Issue." She said, "I am a woman, a Black woman, a poor woman, I'm a fat woman, I'm a middle-aged woman, and I'm on welfare. In this country, if you're any of those things, you count less than any of as a human being. If you're all of those things, you don't count at all." Tillman couldn't have made it clearer for us. She said, "No mother in this country can feel dignified. No woman can be liberated until all get off their knees." Can't you just see? Tabitha set up, get off her knees in Acts 9 at that. So on this Mother's Day, let's arise together. In truth, every day should be Mother's Day. Thank you.